extremely supportive of these initiatives and being available to support whenever we have reason to call on him. I want to also thank Dan Waliemera because he's situated in so many fields, but most importantly for him as a lawyer, he has been through the trenches to defend this space called press freedom. So I want to thank him a lot. And Ruth Sechind is one of the most outspoken when it comes to issues of press freedom at the Human Rights Commission. So you're very welcome. But I also want to thank the editors because they are ably speaking out. They're all over the place trying to do whatever it is in their means to impact the space, because these are the gatekeepers. They can choose to assign journalists to cover an event or not to. They can choose to set the agenda, which we may not be able to. So my friend Alex Atuhairi and the team, Sylvia and Nancha, you're all welcome to this platform to have a candid discussion about how to crystallize these recommendations. Many times we've had reports and we have come up with so many recommendations, but sometimes we have fallen short of seeing the tangible results from the key mandate holders. But with this initiative, we think that we'll go a long way in having so many tangible. So I'm very grateful for this time. It's of course not a lot of time, but given the nature of people that are presenting and the nature of people that are here to participate in this initiative, I believe that we will make the best use of this time. I want to also give you hope that all is not in vain. Journalists are struggling through this time. Everybody will tell you how to get home, to get to their workplaces. Many of them have been laid off, many are not paid. Some have been even essential workers, but some LDUs and security forces do not even know how to interpret these things. So they've ended up attacking the men and women that are doing educate our masses about not only the COVID pandemic, but so many other issues that are relevant in their day-to-day lives. Remember, the politics has not stopped. The economy or our economy still has to go on, and so many things that the media has to drive back home for the wider public. So we must discuss these findings, bearing in mind that these ladies and gents serving as journalists in different media houses need to be protected, need to be catered for. They need provisions. They need to go and test for COVID. They need to have treatments, but they're not in the best places to get all these things. So I'm very grateful and to all of you that have made it. So I take this honor to James, like you said, pass on the mantle to a friend of ours, our partner, our advisor. Is so many things to us, and this is none other than Dr. Don Rokale. But I like him more when it comes to interacting with us. You might think he's our level. Don, we thank you and we're so grateful to you for that. So please don't ever change it. It has so many quotes, very huge quotes that we cannot fit in, but it doesn't need any introduction. It's very hard to introduce a person like Don to the people that are in this conversation, because I believe that none of you or of us really does not know Dr. Don Rokale, even when we need to do the formalities of introducing him, giving us remarks on behalf of Freedom House. James, I don't know how you're going to flow here, whether it is him to invite the said representative or it is then going to come back to you. But thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We are very grateful to you for making time to discuss with us. We hope that we'll have fruitful 2 hours of engagement. Thank you, James, very much. Yes, James.
Thank you, Robert. Of course, we had invited Dr. Rokale. Dr. Don, you're welcome to have a few remarks, and of course, in turn, you'll usher in the representative.
Thank you, James. And good morning to all of you, and good afternoon, depending which time zone, because I know this is streaming on YouTube. The Executive Director of HRNGen, the Board Chair, Madame Maria Umbalava from USAID, various members of the organizations here present, our esteemed panelists, who are here today, as well as all those who are taking part in this important webinar. Good morning to all of you. On behalf of the Freedom House and the Rights and Justice Program, we would like to first of all thank our partner HRNGen and the subgroup under the program for putting together this very insightful and important webinar. I would like to take a bit of time to wish all of you wellness and health. We all know we're going through a very brutal second wave of COVID-19. A number of us have lost family, have lost close friends, or are nursing family and close friends. So I'd like, on behalf of myself and the program, to wish all of you all the best. And we ask the good Lord to give us the strength and guidance to get through this brutal second wave. Having said that, we'd like to commend HRNGen and the subgroup within which they're working under our program for, despite the ongoing disruption caused by the pandemic, to continue to soldier on and work in this new reality by putting together this webinar, bringing together very able panelists that we have this morning to discuss the findings and recommendations of the HRNGen Annual Press Freedom Index that was launched on the 1st of April this year. And Robert, we at Raja are very proud to be associated with you and the subgroup. Raja, or the Rights and Access to Justice Program, is a 3-year program supported by USAID that seeks, among other things, to ensure that citizens in Uganda are able to live in a legal and enabling environment, a just environment, an environment where human rights and the rule of law is respected. We have 3 objectives: one to do with the legal and enabling environment, the other to do with physical and digital security, and the third, which is looking to areas of access to a remedy. We have 5 subgroups that are working on these very important areas: a subgroup on elections, a subgroup on civic space, which I believe this is where we are today, a subgroup on issues to do with legal aid, a subgroup on human rights defenders, and a subgroup on children and justice. Whereas these subgroups work as groups, they are integrated because their work is mutually reinforcing and interrelated. And the discussion we're going to have this morning, looking at the state of the media in Uganda in 2020, is very important, because we all know that the media plays a very critical role in any democracy that we have in the country. As the fourth estate, the media plays a role of accountability and a role of access to information and holding the duty bearers to account. And we always look forward to reading this very important homegrown, and I must emphasize, Robert, homegrown tool, because a lot of the tools we have that chronicle a lot of these issues are foreign, but it's good that we have our own Ugandan domestic index, which is homegrown, which is rooted in the realities of our country. And we look forward to listening from the eminent panelists and the different participants on this webinar, how we as a country can craft together a media space that is conducive for many of the media people and all of us to participate in. So it's important that we look forward to the recommendations being discussed, but more importantly, how we're able to synthesize and obtain issues for advocacy arising out of this very important index and report, but also from the eminent guidance we shall get from the panel and the participants. So we at Freedom House remain standing with you in the subgroup and HRNGen as you do your work, and you can count on our support as we try to make Uganda a better place for all of us, in particular the media space which we're discussing today. So without further ado, I wish you all the best. Let's stay safe, let's observe the SOPs. I'm sure we shall emerge out of this second wave stronger and able to go forth to do our work as human rights defenders in our country. I would like to take this opportunity to invite our colleague from USID, Madam Miriam Umbulava, who is the Democracy and Human Rights Governance Officer at USID, and the point lead as the Adjoint Officer's representative on this program, to give us her remarks and officially open this webinar. Over to you, Marie, and thank you for taking time to join us. So Robert, if you could give Marie access, that would be.
Okay, James was already doing that. James, I hope I don't usurp your powers, because you even have a right to reprimand me for doing that.
No, actually it is
Yeah.
it's actually personal. Someone can mute herself or himself. We give rights of muting to everyone here.
So Marie, you have the floor if you're online.
Yeah, possibly.
Marie, are you online?
Possibly
I had seen her online, so I don't know.
Maybe she has not yet.
She was online a few minutes ago. So
She's posting some messages on the chat group asking us whether we can hear her.
we can't hear her. Marie, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
I'll just call her.
Okay, Mariam says she doesn't seem to see the mute and unmute button.
Maybe the host can unmute her.
Possibly
James, you can unmute her.
Going to or Emma, you can.
Emma, can you locate her and unmute her?
It's Emma, okay. But I think, Emma, just for the guidance of our colleagues who cannot see those buttons, when you just press anywhere on your laptops, it will flash the different options, and then you go to the left, extreme left, and see the mute and mute option.
I don't know whether you have unmuted,
and then be able to
waiting to join. Thank you, Robert. Well, she's online, and I hope they can unmute her.
Emma, can you see her? Emma, could you search Mariam? You'll see the
In the chat room, I see some message that they've lost audio.
I think, Robert, if we can't, she's saying we can proceed.
No, our technical officer is trying to search her. We didn't have the ID number, but I think he's going to do that.
No, but it's, of course, I can see as Maria MU is
Yes,
there.
I've told him to do Maria.
Okay. Or Miriam, not Maria, Miriam.
I think now I am able to unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect, Maria.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect.
Yes, we
All
can hear
right,
you very
wonderful.
well.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, I think I'm able to put my camera on too. Okay, now that I have camera too. Okay. All right. Well, let me move this one here. Well, thank you, and thank you so much for organizing this virtual event. I know it's comes with some technical complications, and thanks for figuring it out and fixing. Well, I want to thank you everyone for joining us today to this virtual dialogue and meeting, especially during these hard times, and thanks for finding time. I want to welcome everyone to the meeting. I cannot really see everyone who is here, but I have here, there are civil society organizations, representatives from media, institutions, universities. I don't want to miss anybody, but ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I want to thank our subgroup of civic space under the Rights and Justice activity for organizing and holding this event that brings participants together to discuss the state of press and media freedom, and to identify prospective solutions and share recommendations to improve the working environment for journalists and media in Uganda. Organizations like Human Rights Network, Journalists-Uganda, and others have been monitoring and documenting the state of press freedom in Uganda and highlighting violations and issues and bringing those issues to the forefront. It is important to know that independent media is an integral part of healthy and strong democracy. While it significantly contributes to creating awareness and sharing information among the citizens, free media also promotes accountability and transparency, which happen to be key tenets of any flourishing democracy. It is therefore important that media, journalists, and press freedoms are protected to do their work in a free and fair environment. The Ministry of Information, Communications and Technology, Uganda Communications Commission, and the National Association of Broadcasters are working to improve media freedoms in Uganda and provide an enabling environment for journalists to do their work despite several challenges. And more needs to be done to improve the working environment for media and journalists and ensure that journalists are protected while doing their work. We look forward to collaboration with Freedom House over the next years of Raja activity implementation. Well, with this, I'm gonna end talking because there's a lot of important conversations and dialogues that we will be having during the next couple hours. I wish you successful working meeting, and I will try to spend as much time as possible during this call. Sometimes I might be leaving, but coming back, and I look forward for recommendations that will come out. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot for fixing this technical issue. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you, Mariam, for those remarks. And thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dawn, as well, and Robert, for the remarks to situate us into the discussion. Like I said earlier at the start, that this course is anchored on probably what of the Press Freedom Index of Uganda 2020, which is a flagship publication, and flagship publication of transpired. That is in 2020. The report documented 174 cases of violations and abuses, which was 9 cases higher than 2019, which had 165 cases. And this is largely SOPs, or government restrictions, that the enforcement of which came with some high-handedness on part of the state agencies. Of those violations, there were 69 assaults. In law assaults, you go beyond just threatening violence, but you actually impact it. And then 40 cases of blocked access to news sites, which is a central issue in journalism. And then over 29 cases of journalists arrested. In addition to that, these numbers from the HRNJ are those numbers that they were able to follow up and verify and authenticate. It is possible that there were other cases that did not come to the to be documented as such. In the same year, still, what is important to note, again, cases of sectarianism or charges of sectarianism came back, with 4 journalists being charged with sectarianism. There was also confiscation and destruction of journalism, were confiscated, some were destroyed, among others spray was sprayed at them. 1 journalist was shot at, and many of you also remember that there were 3 foreign Canadians very well. Then we had 1 journalist being fired for allegedly writing pro for the police to delete footage they had captured. Very interesting developments from Kalangala. And then 5 journalists were threatened with various wide-ranging threats, including life. And then we had 2 radio stations that had hosted opposition politicians being switched off on order. And in relation to radios, a total of 68 violations and abuses were recorded against radio stations. In essence, the employers standing in the way or coming at the side of inflicting abuse and violations. And that we are joined by Joe here, who will shed more light on the perpetrators. Again, the leading were the Uganda Police Force, the Uganda People Defense Forces, and then the community also came up, particularly in the Immigration Department of Uganda, of course, with DCs still coming because of their proximity to power and the fact that they held the security committees at districts. A very, very enormous show of power in these various districts. On a gender perspective, 19 cases of violations and abuses were against female journalists in 2020. That is 10.9% of all the violations. And then most violations in terms of location were in Kampala, which registered 40, Lira, and Kalangala registered 10. Again, you remember the scenes of violence in Luka, and then the show of might in Kalangala. All of this, of course, were attributed to the actions of dispersing the crowds by the security agencies. We need to contextualize again that this index, especially the later quarter of it, captures or came to be at the height of the tense political situation in the country, but also more importantly, during the COVID era, which also saw a lot of applying Article 43 of the Constitution to limit so many of these rights. So this is precisely the context of operating with us, we are graced by the presence of Ms. Inspections at the Human Rights Commission and Joseph to have a media owner in such discourse. We are glad that he's here. And then, of course, Daniel Wayemera, Mr., who is the Dean of School of Law in a number of cases of journalists. So we're going to begin this discussion. I'm going to give a few minutes to Daniel Wayemera to give us an appreciation, their own perception of the current state of media rights, of course, with the hindsight of that press index, and also to highlight what they think are potential recommendations to deal with the future, the reality of what confronts us. I'm sorry, my network goes on and off. I think it's everywhere, but we shall manage. We shall run like that way. So let me invite Daniel to take us to what he thinks are key aspects on this. Dan?
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Daniel Wayemera is my name. Thank you for the introduction, for the fact that you're saying I have many areas in which I have traversed in regard to the issue of media freedom. You did not mention the fact that actually I was a journalist at one time. I was a journalist as a court reporter at one time. So for Monitor, Sunrise newspaper, Sanyo Radio. So I have a bit of practical knowledge, at least from a court reporter's angle, on what the challenges of a journalist are in Uganda. Obviously, you've also stated that I've been doing a bit of work in regard to lawyers' rights, journalists' rights. I've represented a couple of journalists in court. Not only have I represented a couple of journalists, but I've also done a bit of consultancy and research work in this area. Okay, I think that's it with the introductions. In regard to the question that James asks me, Professor Juko has, among others, has mentioned that media freedom, or an independent media, is the oxygen of a sustainable democracy in a country. Without media freedom, you are not going to have the other facets or the other tenets of democracy working optimally. You're going to have challenges. And let me just give an example. The media, an independent media, offers a platform for citizens to engage with those who are elected to lead them. Obviously, there are challenges with states like Uganda, where a few white men sat in Berlin and parceled up areas of Africa and said, this is Uganda, this is Kenya, this is Tanzania. The states in Africa are fragile. But nevertheless, if you have an independent media, then that independent media offers a good platform for the citizens to engage with those they have elected, even if there are challenges with issues to do with elections and how people get into power. Obviously, there is that debate. But you can say, at least if you have an independent media, then the leaders are going to be asked to account. We have seen that quite recently in regard to the issue of where our money has gone. Money that is supposed to take care of critical issue called COVID. You've seen the media playing a very, very, very critical role in asking the critical questions. Where is this money? You received so much money. You received so much money for oxygen cylinders. You received so much for masks. You received so much for this. You received so much for this. We collected so much for this. You said you came to us as the public and collected so much money. What have you done with it? The media has enabled that. Would you call, in regard to the question James is asking me, would you call the media in Uganda independent? I highly doubt. As I've indicated to you, I have practiced as a journalist, at least from a court reporter's angle. I have represented clients in court. I've also done a bit of politics in Uganda. I've also done a bit of research work around this issue of media freedom. So is the media in Uganda independent? My straight up answer is no, it's not. Why? There are many factors. One of the factors, James hinted at it, is the fact that the ownership of these over 300 radio stations, over 40 TV television stations, many newspapers, the ownership, in whose hands is it? Is it in the hands of journalists? Yes, you could say that for a newspaper like the Weekly Observer. And in some sense, then you have a few bits and pieces of what you would call an independent media. But largely, if you look at the ownership of who owns these 300 FM stations, these 40 TV stations, you're going to find that many of them have a relationship associated with the ruling government. Or even if they are not associated with the ruling government, many of them have picked loans from the banks to set up these radio stations and would not want to be on the wrong side of what government would call friendly media. Why? They must pay their loans, they must protect their investment. Consequently, as a result, the kind of content that comes out of such a radio station wouldn't represent or wouldn't be representative of the plurality of voices within the country. So there are many challenges if you just looked at the ownership of the radio stations. If you just looked at the corruption within journalism, the corruption within journalism. I'll give an example. Why would I, if I am paid by a newspaper or a radio station as a court reporter, why would I then receive money from a person who I'm writing about? That's just one aspect. There are challenges to do, and obviously that corruption is brought about by the fact that journalists are paid next to nothing for their efforts. Ndugu Sempal has been discussing this issue, and he has told you that some of the journalists actually now, due to COVID, they have lost livelihood. In regard to aspects of, because many of us are talking about what's the legal framework, does it meet human rights standards? Isn't it in accordance with Article 19 of the ICCPR? Does the national framework in Uganda, Article 29 and 41, fit into the international standard or regional standard or sub-regional standard? But there's the other aspect of the labor rights, the security of these journalists who leaves a radio station and goes to the field? Do they have a jacket clearly indicating that they are the press? Is that press jacket bulletproof? Do they have a helmet? These are basic issues of labor rights. Have they been paid a proper allowance? So these are issues. I know some of these very issues that I'm talking about have come through from the index that we are discussing, but these are important issues. Perhaps another issue that you may want to touch on is the aspect of extra-legal means of dealing with journalists. You've had situations where journalists' cameras are being broken, where journalists are being beaten up, tortured. Many of the cases that I deal with, that I'm representing journalists at, at court, you have a lot of these situations. A journalist's cameras are broken up, they are beaten up, and there's no clear reason why they are being beaten, because they're clearly, I have indicated, they are journalists, they are doing their job, they are covering a story. But somebody will come pick up their cameras, arrest them, torture them, assault them, and these are issues that are out there that need to be looked at. So perhaps now, having gone through the whole spectrum, maybe let me go into a bit of detail in regard to a few aspects of the law. So if you look at the international framework on media freedoms, if you compare that to the Ugandan framework, does the Ugandan framework fit into the international framework? My humble view is it doesn't. If you look at Article 19 of the ICCPR, my humble view, if you look at General Comment 34, my humble view is it doesn't. If you looked at the regional level, the African Charter, does our national domestic legal framework, does it fit into that framework? Is it up to scratch? In my humble view, it's not. If you looked at the countries surrounding us, what provision do we have in the Constitution that provides for media freedom? If you look at Article 29, is it elaborate enough? Is it distinguishing between the freedom of expression and specifically media freedom? In countries like Kenya, the Constitution of Kenya of 2010, the Constitution of Ghana has very elaborate provisions on what the meaning of media freedom is, and there are clear provisions. The Constitution of Ghana, for example, provides for a whole chapter that describes what this media freedom, what press freedom is. Unfortunately, here in Uganda, what is provided for in Article 19 of the ICCPR, the aspect of seeking, receiving, and imparting information is not covered. So it was in our earlier constitution, the 1967 constitution. I don't know who, the drafters of the 1995 constitution have removed aspects of that, and that has been reflected by Justice Mlenga's decision, Justice Mlenga's judgment in the Onyango board decision. So you can clearly see that we have challenges in regard to whether our framework, our constitutional provision, Article 29, is indeed wide enough. Now, in regard to, if you compare Article 19 of the ICCPR, specifically 19.3, and then you come to our Article 43, which provides ostensibly for the justifiable limitations. You can also clearly see that our Article 43 provides for a general limitation. It is not context specific. So if you go to other countries, you would find that the limitation in regard to freedom of expression, in regard to media freedom, is specific. If you went to Malawi, if you went to Zambia, those constitutions have specific limitations. It's not just a general limitation in regard to human rights. And the justification is what I have stated. The importance of that is what I've stated earlier. Prof. Joko says, media freedom is the oxygen of a sustainable democracy. So if you leave those constitutional provisions as juxtaposed against the international framework, if you came to the acts that are made under those constitutional provisions, if you go to, for example, the UCC Act, I carried out a study on the UCC, and if you look at provisions of the UCC Act, if you look at, for example, Section 31 that is often cited by the UCC, if you look at Schedule 4, you're going to find there are real challenges because the provision is vague. Not only is it vague, but it doesn't meet what you would call the justifiable limitations on this media freedom. If you look at aspects of what the law itself, the UCC Act 2013 has created, there are many aspects of that law that have not been implemented. For example, the establishment of the communications tribunal. I can see in the index it's indicated. This is a very urgent quasi-judicial tribunal that should be established. Why? Because many of the cases that have been taken to court, many of the cases that have been involved in, when you arrive at court and you find the UCC lawyers, all they tell you is that you're in the wrong forum. The proper forum is the communications tribunal. But then they are referring you to the communications tribunal, but the communications tribunal is not there to consider some of these matters. And because of the absence of this communications tribunal that should have been in place long ago, you have situations where the UCC is arbitrarily suspending journalists. I'm doing one of these cases where 39 journalists and producers were suspended. You have the UCC closing radio stations for clumsy reasons. You close a radio station, a TV station, for hosting, for allegedly that radio station hosting an opposition figure, an opposition politician. If you looked at, and there are many aspects that I can go to in regard to this UCC Act, but let me, in the interest of time, let me move to the Press and Journalists Act. If you look at the Press and Journalists Act, you find that there are a lot of challenges. I know HRNJ and a couple of CSOs went to the Constitutional Court in regard to this. The code under that act is talking of revelation of sources as long as those news sources, as long as it's in the interest of the public, especially in regard to national security. So clearly you can see the Press and Journalists Act is, instead of encouraging, instead of facilitating media freedom, it is trying to curtail media freedom. If you look at the issues of minimum qualifications, if you look at the issues of registration of journalists, you saw, and I saw that in the index, this is something that came up, and good enough Justice Nambayo did some good work, although there are a few challenges with the ruling, but she did a bit of good work, where journalists were being required first get accredited. We know the international framework does not agree with that position. The cases from the Inter-American Court, there are about 1-2 cases that say you shouldn't register a journalist because there's a close relation, there's a close link between freedom of expression and media freedom. If you look at the Anti-Terrorism Act, there are real challenges there. The description of what a terrorist is and what a journalist who is reporting about terrorist activities is required by that law to do. You can find, you'll see that there are real challenges in regard to how the Anti-Terrorism Act treats somebody who is giving information. So, and just to mention those 3 laws, maybe I could mention one more, or 1 or 2 more. If you looked at the law on access to information, the Access to Information Act, what are the provisions therein that provide for exceptions to how a journalist should access information to the public? The process is very onerous, it's very challenging. And there have been a couple of cases in regard to accessing oil agreements, and you've seen that this is quite a very difficult process. And actually, if we just, in regard to that Access to Information Act, if you looked at the provision on, the exceptions on which information should not be obtained by journalists, you can see that there are real challenges because there's certain information that act prohibits a normal person from asking, a journalist from asking. But the process itself of the procedure of asking for the information is quite complicated. So if the officer refused to give you the information, you are required to file an application in court. Does the person, or does a citizen, any citizen of Uganda, have that amount of money to go through all this this process? If you juxtapose that law, the Access to Information Act, vis-a-vis the Official Secrets Act, you can find that you have real challenges. There's a clash in the provisions of those 2 acts of parliament. So perhaps let me now go to the issue of the practice, the application of these provisions of the law in the actual litigation. So there.
It's done in around 3 minutes.
Yes, I'm finalizing. So I've represented a couple of journalists, and usually the applications that we file, with the exception of constitutional petitions, which will take forever, and in my humble view, this constitutional court is a dead constitutional court. I'm sorry to use that word, because if you file the case today, it will be heard in the next 15 years. But with the exception of such cases that we file in the constitutional court, if you filed a case in accordance with Article 50, which is simply an application, it's a notice of motion, and with affidavits, with annexures. So basically, this court of law that you filed your application for enforcement of human rights in accordance with Article 50 has everything on its table. So I have my motion, I have my affidavits in support. On the affidavit in support, I have annexed all the necessary evidence. I've annexed the fact that I'm a journalist with NBS. I was beaten. There is a police form. There is medical forms. There is money that I lost. There are things that I've attached them. Then these documents are filed in court, and the court seals them. And we serve the respondents, be it the Attorney General, be it a specific police officer who has beaten a journalist. We serve these documents, and the respondents reply. Why would it take a court of law 5 years, 4 years, 6 years hearing such an application? Why? Why would it take a law? Actually, some of the applications that are filed in Lira now, because one of the applications we're praying that this matter be referred to the East African Court of Justice in view of the fact that the Section 31 and Schedule 4 of the UCC Act was in violation of the East African Treaty, specifically Articles 6, 7, and 8 of the East African Treaty. Why would a judge take 4 years to hear such a basic application? As I've indicated, some of the cases were filed, the way the judges handle these cases is so leisurely that when the human rights instruments that we have, the Human Rights Enforcement Act that we have, 2019, is very strong law. But when you get to court and you see the leisurely way with which the judges are listening to these matters, you wonder whether the judges have an appreciation of what is at stake, considering that the media freedom is the oxygen of a sustainable democracy. Just to give an example, I was recently in a court in Mukono, and the judge dismissed our application for human rights enforcement. This is a journalist who was beaten up because he was covering a land dispute. So the judge asked me where the applicant was. I said, the applicant is not available, my lord, because he's away, he's busy, he was notified. It was a short notice, and he was unable to come to court. And lo and behold, this judge said because the applicant was not in court, the application was dismissed because he seems not to be interested in pursuing his case. So that's the leisurely manner with which judges take these issues. Lastly, and more importantly, there is need to have a lot of training for not only the judges, judicial officers who are here listening to these matters, but also to the lawyers. Our training, I've been around academia for a while. The training of lawyers, many lawyers come through school. Even when they study human rights, all they will know about freedom of expression, media freedom is Article 29, which is really not very specific, and maybe the limitations, the general limitation of all human rights under Article 43. So there's a need to train, to go to these law schools. I've approached HRNJ for this, to go to these law schools and train lawyers about media freedom before they leave the law school, because it's much wider than the basics that are in our constitution. So that you are able to capture when these people eventually become judicial officers, when they eventually become lawyers, practitioners, they already have a proper grounding on this area called media freedom. But if you go to a judge, and the judge, all they studied in the law school was Article 29 and its general limitation, Article 43, you're going to have a lot of challenges. Actually, the judge in Mukono told me, these journalists have a lot of places where they can speak their things. You send them to go and speak them from there. Very dismissively like that. This court will not solve those issues. Let him go to somewhere, they will solve those issues. So in order for the lawyers, because at the end of the day, many of these issues that surround the disputes around media freedom end up in court. We need to have a cadre of well-trained, capacitated lawyers and human rights activists defending this space. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Daniel, very much for that experiential sharing you've had. Of course, Dan raises two very interesting questions, which I'll later return to him, but also probably for discussion later. Can we still rely on courts as arenas of resistance towards impunity on the media fraternity? Many of you remember during the apartheid war, or the struggle for apartheid in South Africa, the courts were actually actual battlegrounds of wrestling power and concessions from the then very apartheid system. Daniel seems to paint a picture that what seems to be the remaining custodian of Chapter 4 is potentially under siege, a siege of lack of skills, siege of lack of capacity, and siege of dismissiveness, which sometimes comes from the fact that you don't want your ineptitude or inability to adjudicate over issues to be shown or to be known, so you easily dismiss of cases. So a fundamental question there, can we still rely on courts as potential centers of pushback to impunity, but especially the courts that can decide the legal framework? Because again, Daniel has painted a very not so rosy picture of the current law that seems to be a tool in containing critical journalism. And again, the question is, how do we reform that law? Should we go advocacy? Should we go court-wise? Of course, the current backlog is known. One of the cases that was filed of public order management in 2012 was only ruled upon a year ago. So questions surrounding how do we better the fight legally, and how do we rely on courts? Can we even rely only on domestic courts? Or is it possible that time has come for us to even consider the arenas of litigation beyond the courts? At this point, I'm glad that Daniel has picked one institution of power and oversight, that is the court, partly. I want to bring in here Ms. Ruth Sinkindi. With all our enormous experience in monitoring and investigation, and being at the helm of the Custodian Board of Human Rights, the Human Rights Commission, we want to pick your views, Ruth, and also try to paint to us a picture of what happens when reports of the commission go to Parliament. Again, a connection between what is happening on the impunity of journalists, like we have seen in the PFI, in relation to Parliament, and of course, even what the commission is doing yonder than the normal in trying to push back on these violations. Ms. Ruth, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nkobi. I'm going to start from, because I think my presentation was on duty bearers, but you asked a pertinent question: what happens to the reports when they go to Parliament? The Commission has a mandate, a constitutional mandate, to receive, investigate human rights violation. We have an oversight role to analyze and advise government and assess government's compliance with regard to human rights standards. That means we monitor government operations, interventions, and everything that government does. We also have a mandate to conduct civic education and all that. But some of the things we have worked on relates to media freedoms, freedom of expression, and other resultant rights. And when we send them to Parliament, please allow me to start from there. When we send them to Parliament, they're debated on the floor of Parliament. Unfortunately, by last year, Parliament was still debating our 2016 annual report, 2017 annual report. And then you realize that that is very late, because many times or sometimes our recommendations are overtaken by events. But that doesn't stop us from following up on the matters and taking matters before the tribunal. Now, just to get back on where we were, I wanted to share my screen so that I can take us through, I can take us through, I don't know, you've disabled my sharing of screen, if you can allow that, so that I can have a proper discussion with everyone following. Is that possible? Can you enable my screen sharing, please?
It is enabled.
It's enabled. Okay. Just a minute, please allow me to do this.
As Ruth sets up, anyone with a question, kindly just put it in the chat and then we shall relay them to our panelists.
Okay, yes, can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my
Yes,
presentation
we
was basically
can.
about the role of duty bearers in the quest for freedom of speech. And I will be very fast because I just have a few minutes. And I'll start from the UDHR. It's good that the previous speaker really spoke about some of the legal framework. So I shall not belabor that. But basically, when we look at Article 19 of the UDHR, that is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the mother of human rights. Everyone has a right to freedom of expression, and that right includes holding opinions without interference, and the right to seek, receive, and impart information, okay, through any media, regardless of frontier. I think that is very clear. And I'm glad my colleague also talked about Article 19 of the ICCPR, because it is from there that we get the tenets of this right. That is the media freedoms, or the press freedoms, or the freedom of expression. But basically the three tenets about receiving, as the right to seek, receive, and impart information, and those are the three tenets of the freedom of expression. Now, we are lucky that at the African level, the African Charter has really come out to also emphasize the freedom of expression. And Article 9 provides that every person or every individual has a right to receive information, and every individual has a right to express and disseminate his or her opinion. Now, it does not exclude anyone. That means every individual has potential, and if they want to, they should have room to put information out there. And we have our Article 29 that he has ably talked about. I shall not belabor with regard to that. Now, just to add my voice on what he has said, the promotion and protection of media freedoms helps in the protection of speech and expression, and this is key in every democratic society. Now, when media freedoms are attacked, like in our country, it affects all the other resultant rights. Therefore, the issue of media freedoms is not just about the media fraternity alone, but it's for us as human rights defenders, because it affects the rights of all citizens. And those are the three tenets that I talked about: the right to hold an opinion without interference, the right to seek and receive information, and the right to impart information. But it also involves the right not to speak. Now, I was required to talk about the state's obligation. And when we go back to human rights, the state has basically three obligations. That is the obligation to respect, the obligation to protect, and the obligation to fulfill. And those are very important. Now, when it comes to media freedoms, the state or government has an obligation to ensure that they do not interfere in the rights of media freedoms, that people should be able to receive, to impart information and to use that information. We have, for example, issues of access to information, but the media has, when we're doing an evaluation of media freedoms in Uganda, and I'm glad it came out in the index report, access to public information is so hard. And because many times they feel that it's classified. But we have an Access to Information Act. Unfortunately, it is not implemented. The state also has an obligation to protect journalists and all media practitioners from violations. So this obligation requires state agents to protect individuals against interference from third parties, to protect them from their own employers, to protect them from interferences. You have heard on radio and televisions where some politicians have been stopped from accessing particular media houses because of a call. All this is in contravention of this obligation. And Uganda has ratified the ICPR, as we already know. Also, the state also has an obligation to fulfill, and that is a positive and progressive action, where the state has enacted laws, it's required to enact laws that are human rights compliant, policies, administrative measures to ensure that all rights are protected, including media freedoms. And I wanted to speak to General Comment 34, which provides that states have a positive as well as negative obligation to provide access to information. Unfortunately, this remains a challenge. So the states have an obligation to make government information available to the public so that there is public scrutiny. Now, I was reading something on how the oversight role in the US and how everyone, the media and the ordinary citizen, is able to know the president's salary, how much the president spends per day, how much the public officers spend. That way, there is room for accountability. But now, when the public cannot access government information, then it becomes a challenge to enforce accountability. The states also have an obligation to ensure easy, prompt, and effective and practical access to information, as well as the obligation to enact procedures to give effect to this right. Now, the role of the media is very key in governance, and this cannot be emphasized. So in all aspects of governance, these are facilitated by independent and responsible media within society. The media also provides a channel through which information is conveyed. I'm sure we know the role of the media, because they help in providing and facilitating accountability to duty bearers, and they provide a voice for the voiceless, particularly the vulnerable. In many cases, they expose corruption and call for accountability. And we have noted that journalists, reporters, bloggers provide an oversight role and are the watchdog of the state. So when the media plays these roles effectively, we find that human rights are also protected. Now, they have so many challenges that as a commission we have picked up, including security and safety of journalists. We have seen them being battered, being harassed, being vandalized, being illegally detained. We have seen deaths of media practitioners. Media practitioners have cited issues of political interference, intimidation. Many fear persecution, so there are reports that don't come out. The media houses are so fearful of closing their media houses because they will lose an income. There's denial of access to information, like I've said, and all these violations stem from, one, the state itself, but also private practitioners and the general public, because we have found that media practitioners or media houses also violate the rights of the journalists. And here I'm saying that don't shoot the messengers, because many times the media is just reporting what is out there, but instead we hold them accountable, or they end up in harm's way because of what they're reporting. They're just messengers. We have also noted that there's a lot of self-censorship, and many times you don't get the real story. Sometimes it's political censorship, it's corporate censorship, it's security censorship, moral censorship based on religion and all that, religious censorship, and many other types of censorship that we have noted. The Commission has also noted that the conditions of work for media practitioners are not satisfactory. We have noted that many media owners or houses don't offer formal employment to journalists, and that they are paid very poorly, which exposes them to vulnerability and sometimes corruption. And sometimes they don't provide them with protective gear, transport fares, they walk long distances, there's no job security, and this is not the state, but the media houses. We have also noted that the quality of media production is low, and especially now that we have bloggers and tweeters and such, because they're not educated sometimes, then the quality of the information sent out there, not verified, not analyzed, not articulate. So we have misinformation, disinformation, and fake news. We have also noted low investment in media trainings, and many times media houses want to save costs, which has led to widespread poor journalism. I'm glad that all these issues have ended up in the index report, and they have been highlighted. We are saying that we all need to appreciate the rights that go hand in hand with responsibilities, because we can't talk about rights without responsibilities. And the Constitution states categorically that the exercise and enjoyment of rights and freedoms is inseparable from the performance of duties. So like all other rights, media and press freedoms also come with duties and responsibilities. However, because of these duties and responsibilities, we note that we have laws and legislation that limit the rights, okay? And my colleagues spoke about them, I want to go into them. However, when they limit or stop stories from coming out, or when they limit and curtail media freedoms, that limitation should be lawful, it should be necessary, it should be proportional and acceptable, okay? In any demonstrably justifiable democratic society. Because, because this is very important, for any limitation, because these are not absolute rights. The planned principles of proportionality, legality, acceptability, and necessity is very important. But many times we have questioned why certain limitations have been put in place and they don't meet the threshold. We don't find them lawful. We have not found them necessary. But we find that because it's a way of censoring something, and or limiting or stopping the truth from coming out, that is why sometimes the rights have been limited. And because of that, it's important that I bring out Article 19 of the ICCPR that speaks to the limitation. And if I go to 19.3, it says that the exercise of rights provided under paragraph 2 of the articles carries with it special duties and responsibilities. It may therefore be subject to certain restrictions, but these shall only be such as provided by law and are necessary. So it's very important that the limitations of any kind should be lawful, it should be necessary, it should be acceptable, and should be proportional to the threat caused. So according to the legal limitations have been provided and expressly stated. And for us in Uganda, we have said the protection of these limitations many times are done in the protection of national security, public order, public health, public morals. That is what we have in the Constitution. So therefore, the fulfillment of duties and responsibilities by the media is equally critical for the protection of human rights in Uganda. Now, I wanted to bring in aspects of what the African Charter or the international mechanisms have stated. For example, the African Court on Human and People's Rights. In the case of Connect versus Burkina Faso, they say that the freedom of expression in a democratic society must be subject to a lesser degree of interference. That means if you're going to interfere or limit, it has to be at a lesser degree. So people who assume highly visible public roles must necessarily face a higher degree of criticism. So many times politicians come out and say, don't criticize me because I am so and so. The African Court has come out to say that people who assume a high visible public roles must necessarily face a higher degree of criticisms than private individuals. Otherwise, a public debate must be maybe stifled together. So we should be able to analyze and assess. And the European Court on Human and People's Rights has stated that the politician inevitably and knowingly lays himself open to close scrutiny of his every word and deed by both journalists and the public at large. And he may display a greater degree of tolerance, especially when he himself makes public statements that are susceptible to criticism. So meaning that if you become a public figure, you become a minister, you become a politician, you become a leader in any way, you have opened yourself to close public scrutiny so that your every word that you say should be assessed, analyzed, scrutinized, because then you become a public figure. And it's very important for us to take note of that, because many times we do some censorship because of many reasons, but many times that are involved with the politics. I also wanted to bring in this resolution by the UN Human Rights Council on political speech. And under resolution AHRC 12L14, the Human Rights Council stated that discussion on government policies and political debate should be allowed. Reporting on human rights, government activities and corruption in government should be encouraged, or should happen in every country. Election campaigns, peaceful demonstrations of public activities, expression of opinion and dissent, religion and belief, the free flow of information and ideas, and access to use of information and communication technologies should be a must for all states, so that persons can be able to freely debate and speak to all these aspects in each country. And I thought this was very useful. And I also looked at other cases. This was a case of the Southwest African High Court on freedom of press of Namibia versus cabinet. And this was the ruling that because people may hold their government in contempt does not mean that a situation exists which constitutes a danger to security. So just because someone expresses dissent from government does not, or contempt of a state, does not constitute danger to security of the state. And in the case of United Kingdom House, the United Kingdom House of Lords, in the case of R versus the Secretary of State, this was the ruling that free flow of information and ideas from political debates is very important. It is a safety valve. People are more ready to accept decisions that go against them if they can, in principle, seek to influence them. It acts as a brake to the abuse of power by public officials. It facilitates the exposure of errors in the governance and administration of justice of the country. So what am I saying? I'm saying that free press or independent press facilitates democracy. It facilitates political debates. It facilitates information where people are able to make informed decisions, they have informed views, and just because some people may be in contempt or may not agree with particular government provisions, does not mean that they are a threat and a danger to security. This is what some of these court decisions are saying. So the three-part test on limitation is that any restriction on the right must be prescribed by law. The restrictions must serve one of the prescribed purposes. We have discussed that, and the restriction must be necessary to achieve the prescribed purpose. And I have made recommendations because James talked about recommendations. Some of the recommendations, these are from our reports. I just picked some, there are very many. We called on government to observe its obligations to respect and protect the enjoyment of media freedoms. We have previously called on government to promote an independent, free and self-governing and responsible press. We called on Parliament to repeal bad laws, especially those declared unconstitutional by courts of law, and to review all media laws to ensure that they are human rights compliant. We called on government to investigate allegations of harassment of journalists by state actors and also punish the perpetrators. We called on media practitioners to uphold their professional and ethical code to ensure that they can have trade unions and they have better bargaining power. We called on media houses to ensure continuous training of their journalists because we realized that journalists sometimes are lacking. We called on media houses to provide enforceable employment contracts. I have noted that some don't have contracts. We called on media houses to provide appropriate safety gear for journalists. You see them running around without protective gear, and they're at risk, really. They don't have jackets. We called on media houses to provide legal services for their staff. And in conclusion, I'll say that the role of the media and its contribution to the development of democratic processes and the defense of fundamental freedoms should be recognized by all. So it's imperative that we talk about rights as entitlements and not just favors. I thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. A number of questions are coming in from chat. I think I'll revert to them, to you, when I eventually bring in Joseph. I want us to just finish with all our panelists and then we can go back to engage them one-on-one. But Joseph, even as you come in, I think Ms. Sinkin has set the platform for you. And probably the first issue we want to understand from you as media owners, what is it with safety gear? Is it too expensive? Questions of training for your employees. Questions of lawyering when they need lawyers for legal representation. I mean, so many issues, but I know you will find a way of juggling them. But let me bring in Joseph. Those of you who have just joined us, Joseph is a journalist, but also a manager in journalism, but also more importantly is here in his capacity as part of a couple of minutes, 15. And then after that, we shall take a plenary of just around 10 minutes, and then we intend to close by a few minutes into midday. Joe, I'm noting all the questions coming in from the. Let's bring in Joseph here. Robert, you also coming from the coalition. Emma, you're sharing something for Joseph?
No, except if he wants to share my face. Good morning once again. Do you guys hear me? Am I audible enough for everyone? I don't know how you signal that you're able to hear me. Once again, I would like to say good morning to you all and to say, how are you doing amidst everything? How are you? Are you keeping safe? To the distinguished panel, my fellow panelists, I would like to say thank you. You've done a fantastic job. Most of the issues, really, you have highlighted them. To Human Rights Network for Journalists, good reports you put together. And actually, I was surprised when I was seeing the incidents which were captured and you have only 167. I was like, no way, it can't be only that. I thought there were way more than that. I thought in my years, yes, it's the year where there were lots of incidents, but I felt like there were way too many. So from where I stand, I feel last year, 2020, was the most brutal year for the journalism and the media in Uganda that I've witnessed in the last 20 years that I've been active and involved in the media. Just a little bit about National Association of Broadcasters as introduced. My name is Joseph Beyanga. I work with Nation Media Group where I do head radio, but away from that, I serve on the national executive of the National Association of Broadcasters, where I'm the Secretary General. National Association of Broadcasters is basically a group that brings together the other broadcasters, and that's TV, where we have 48 TV stations, radio, where we have 310 radio stations. At times, by the time you check with the records, you find like 3 more were born overnight. So that's a growing area. And we also have online, the websites, the digital platforms are also represented on NAB. By affiliation through UMOA, we also somehow represent the print media. UMOA is the Media Owners Association, but it focuses more on the commercial arm of our industry. NAB focuses more on the advocacy side, which I think makes it a bit more relevant for this conversation. So in the year 2020, we had several engagements, and I'll just highlight some of them to speak to some of the issues which have been raised by fellow panelists. One of them was with the Parliament of Uganda. That was the 10th Parliament, because we are now in the 11th. The 10th Parliament with the speaker, with the different committees on ICT and all that. And one of the big issues which we kept pushing was the issue of the Communications Tribunal. As you're aware, the Uganda Communications Act of 2013, it asks for the Communications Tribunal to be set up. Since 2013 up to now, nothing has happened. When you talk to people who are supposed to be providing for it, they tell you the Judicial Service Commission is supposed to make recommendations to the president, and then the president makes appointment. Up to now, year after year, for the last, I think, 2 or 3 years, we've been pushing for that, and nothing is in place. So whose interest to why the Communications Tribunal is not in place, we don't know. The other engagements, but we've engaged, I remember even 2018, 2019, when we had a meeting with the president, it was one of the issues that were tabled, and president promised to get back to us, and he tasked his people to look into that. Nothing has happened. We've had literally at every engagement with every stakeholder, with everybody responsible who has a say in that happening, and we've not got any solid assurance that this is being done, this is happening, and we'll have the tribunal set up in 6 months or whatever. No, that's one area where the government is very silent. In the last year, as the brutality really went a notch higher, and that's as we came from the lockdown and the easing of the lockdown as we are entering into the elections, we saw the brutality not just out in the field, by this time it came even to the doorstep, where you had people coming as guests on the radio and TV shows being arrested, others being picked from the radio studios and TV studios. So we engaged with the people who were committing those offenses, because, you know, as the other panelists have shared with you, you go to court, you never get answers. We engaged with the UPDF, we engaged with the Ministry of Internal Affairs, we engaged with the National Joint Security Committee, where many pledges were made, including protecting the media and protecting the journalists. 1-2 months down the road, we seem to have some sanity prevailing. Shortly after that, as the election campaigns went a notch higher, things went haywire. But as NAB, we never kept engaging. Yeah, we had engagements of doing big meetings, but we had lots of one-on-one engagements, whereby an incident happens, you make a phone call to whoever is responsible, they make a promise today, tomorrow you have some peace, the following day, things go back. Many cases, because we worked closely with the Editors Guild, where things do not work, the Editors Guild were, as the leading arm in protection of journalists, went to court, and things were not moving. But we kept pushing, and we've not given up. And later, towards I think it was this year after the elections, though we're supposed to be commenting more about the incidents of 2020, we had an engagement with the UPDF after the former CDF came out to apologize after the incidents, in the several incidents, and made commitments, and we tried to have a working relationship of how we can support each other, support people, support our journalists, protect our journalists. I'm focusing a bit more on the brutality because it's one thing that gives birth to other issues that I will highlight shortly. So a few promises were made, and but in there you realize, yeah, you're speaking with the CDF, but then there's another, maybe, is there another line where the instructions and the commands are coming from in UPDF other than the CDF? the things were not clear, but we kept engaging nevertheless, because then if Robert was going to, it would give you some of the details. You engage with a normal UPDF, the one we know, and then you find some of these crimes were committed by SFC, and SFC somehow was not reporting to the CDF. So it became a bit challenging in terms of protecting the journalists, and but we never gave up. We kept engaging, and we are still engaging even up to now. The other thing which happened was, after realizing that there were so many informal power centers, we tried to engage individuals who hold high offices and who hold power, both formally and informally. Because if you're looking at some instructions going out, most of these things you never know where they come from. That's how broken some of our state institutions have gone down. My counsel, Dr. Daniel, was talking about how you go to court and they tell you, you people, you have many platforms where you can speak, go and address your issues from that side. So some are those of the challenges that we faced as people who are protecting our journalists, because as media, if we don't have journalists bringing the product on the table, we have our product becomes inferior. We rely a lot on our journalists, who go out, the field soldiers who go, the guys who are on the desk who write the stories, and the ones who broadcast them, and the others who publish them. We rely on them a lot for our product as media. So they are really crucial in our operations, and their safety is paramount in whatever we seek to do. But how come we still have all these challenges that we have? Let me just touch a bit on some of the issues we have. One of the issues we've been facing, and we've been intentionally working on to sort out as National Association of Broadcasters, is the media, as was highlighted, I think, by Daniel. The nature of the ownership of the media, as you had, we have 310 radio stations and 48 TV stations. Many of the people who own TVs and radio, they are not in need for journalism. Others are not in need for business. Others are in need purely for politics, and others are in for their faith issues. So that becomes a big challenge, because the guy who is in for politics, he's definitely serving another master, not the independent journalism. So that becomes hard when you come to enforcing and when you're demanding the principles of journalism, when you're demanding professionalism. They have no respect for it. And as you hear, we have 310 radio stations. So getting them to speak from one voice, it becomes hard. In NAB, we have different communities. We have the community radio stations, we have the religious radio stations, then we have representatives from different regions. At times, getting them to speak with one voice, not very easy. It's been harder. Right now, I would say we're in a better place, but not yet at the desired point. So these many groups speaking with different voices, most of them, a good number of them really with not so much respect for professionalism, can be challenging when it comes to demanding for rights of journalists to be protected and be upheld, and make sure we have independent journalism. So divided media from the top to the bottom not only stops with the ownership of the media houses, but even when you come to our journalists, we have different, we have UJA, we have Editors Guild, we have different organizations, and all of them, just like the way our politics is, they've all been penetrated. And you find one group, you find one, if they have a journalist who's nowadays, I've seen something very interesting, a journalist openly political, who is subscribing to people power, and everything becomes, they're pushing towards one direction, and another one is pushing towards the other direction. So you find different bodies of journalists too divided that they can't even fight for the same cause. For the journalists, you find journalists calling each other names. So that has been a bit challenging in terms of uniting them. But I thank God, came Editors Guild, which has a respected leadership and across the divide, and is trying to mend faces, try to bring the journalists together. And at NAB, we are supporting the Editors Guild, and we're working with them closely to see how we can support them more especially when it comes to getting protective gear for the journalists, which has been highlighted. It was a challenge before you even buy the gear. First of all, it's very expensive. When you even buy it, getting it in the country to have it into your media house, it needs to be cleared, not by anybody, but by the CDF's office. So from the several engagements, we actually discovered it much easier nowadays. We've shortened the whole process, and it should be much easier and faster to get your protective gear in if you can afford it. Also, what we discovered is the army actually do manufacture protective gear, the one which they give their soldiers. So if you go to their, it's the Rural Industries National NEC, yes, you can actually purchase your protective gear. So you no longer have to spend $2,000 to get one piece. That's the helmet and the jacket. For one journalist, I think the one at UPDF, it's much cheaper. But those, since they give it to their soldiers, I guess it is safe. I haven't seen any piece from there, but they've said they make, and it's available for the public. So we've, from the different, yes, please?
Just a question there. You with this protective gear, you're saying journalists should be able to get them on their own. There are no efforts as media owners to come together and buy in bulk and give away to your employees as a duty that you owe them, or protection and safety? You seem to be throwing the buck up to them.
No. When I say get the protective gear, I am talking about media houses. I'm not addressing a specific journalist. Thank you for that clarification. So it's what I'm speaking is more, I'm looking at each media house. It should be responsible for the safety of the journalists you put out in the field. That's both because there's something that Ruth hinted on, the workman compensation, which is a bit very foreign to most of our media houses, because even most of the media houses, they don't even give the journalists work tools. So it's a long way, and this, some of it is something I will just talk about the economics of the media houses. The last time we checked, that was at the end of the financial year 2019-2020. Less than 10% of the media houses were profitable. That is a media house which is able to pay a decent salary to their workers and at least pay all their obligations and break even. Less than 10%. That was before COVID came in. After COVID, most media houses lost 40 to 60% of their revenue. Those which were already not making any profit. Now you can imagine what happened after COVID. We're yet to get the reports. But I don't think most media houses are in a good place. And as you know, most of them rolled their operations. And definitely the people who get affected first are the journalists, because we tend to be the most in the media houses where they work. So the bit of the contracts, most of the issues were talked about, so I'll jump from one issue to the other. The bit of having our media practitioners, the journalists, have contracts, it's an issue which we talked about. We've talked about, addressed it twice in our annual general meetings, pressing it on the owners to make sure all the people we employ have contracts. We've even worked, and this one may be surprising to many, that we emphasized it to UCC. It's part of the requirements for your license to be issued with a license as a broadcasters, more special broadcasters, that all the people you're employing have contracts. We've disagreed on the qualifications. They have a different requirement. We have a different understanding. So the one of qualifications is still under debate, but the issue of contracts, because many media houses work with people, they don't pay them. I mean, we can't shy away from this, and we are urging some of the fellow owners or the managers of the media to make sure they take care of their people. If you take care of your people, they take care of your business. But most people seem to have a different perspective, because most of the media owners don't seem to be focused a good number of the media owners, not most, so a good number of media owners seem to be focused on something else, not good and professional journalism. So we keep pushing that. It's not something that will just change overnight, because you know, if you look at the media in Uganda from 1992, when we had the first FM station, up to 2012, when the number had hit 260, I believe the media expanded and grew too much, too fast, that many things were never factored in. And you ended up with many media houses manned by people who are not professional, who are not trained. So now the schools like Cavendish University, like Makerere University, Mukono University, which teach journalists and all that, they could not match the number. They could not match the number of demand, because you have corporate companies taking some of our media trade at the journalists as PROs. You have others going into civil society, and then they come to media, and the media, if it's not making money, it means it can't pay them a living wage, and then they definitely exit. So that high turnout for our practitioners just makes it impossible to have any professional standards. And definitely Robert and my colleagues here who encounter and interact with journalists, if you enter most of the newsrooms at the moment, there are very few senior journalists. And a good example is the guys who are covering the election, just the concluded elections. You had less than 35% of the guys who were on the field, they were covering their first election. And that, it means a lot in terms of the quality of the product you get. And most of these guys were covering it as freelancers. They have no attachment to any media house. They will say, oh, I have a story, are you interested? That can never really work for professional journalism. They can't work and support independent journalism. They can't give you a quality that we are looking at, which will put Uganda on a different level when it comes to media freedom. Because if you don't know somebody, if they are struggling to make it to the field where they are going, if they are struggling to do, if they have no proper training, you will not get anything. Then the other thing which has, all these many gaps have been, you have a repressive regime in power, which is not so much friendly and welcoming criticism as the way it used to be back in the days, up to maybe mid-2000. So when you have the media which is weak economically, which you have, when you have a media where the practitioners, the journalists are not experienced, and most of them don't understand their rights, and neither are they protected by both the industry and their employers, then they are not willing to die for something which is a good, what the lawyers will call public interest, what we're supposed to be serving, public interest, public good. They'll not give you a quality product. So the repressive regime will see those cracks. They definitely always have the intelligence. They'll see those cracks, and they've taken advantage of those cracks. They will scare the journalists, and when they scare them with the violence and all that, and their media houses are not protecting them, and you go, if you get an injury, God forbid, the treatment is on you, you have no insurance, people will not be willing to die for anything. I'm not saying there's any story worth dying for, but somebody, they will be willing to move in and do something when they know somebody is protecting their back. So as media houses, I would say we've really not done a good job in protecting our journalists, but we are getting better. I would say this year, last year, we started making efforts compared to 2016. I think between 2016 and 2020, our standards went really down. So the other bit which, as owners of the media, we need to pay attention to is, and also as people who are here, is the media itself, the platforms, the environment we work in has evolved so much. The way the media was and the media terrain, the way it was in 2013 when this act was came into effect, has changed so much. But our laws and our legal frameworks and all that, they are static, still looking at media the way it was back then. if somebody now, the UCC and all that who are regulating us, some of the things they are unleashing and they are demanding are obsolete. They are asking you for equipment which really no longer serve any purpose in a broadcast chain, but because it's in their law, they demand for it, and then it makes it, because it's not being produced en masse, you have to make specific purchases, you make a specific order, it becomes expensive. That also has hindered a lot of the way the media works. And so the regulation, most of it really needs to be reviewed to make sure it serves and it's in tune with the time and have it effective. Then the other bit, which if I may just hit on now, what do we need to do? Because we can lament for 3 days, and the report has already done a good job capturing some of the things which we need to do, the violations and all that. But I would like to point out 2 or 3 things which I think we need to work on as media owners and as practitioners. One, we need to seek out partnerships with people who have been ahead of us, who have done it, who have gone through the same challenges that we are going through today. There's no point in addressing the same problem twice. Why should you reinvent the wheel? Somebody has already found out how it works. So we need partnerships with people who have already gone through this. And these partnerships will come in a way that they will offer you training, because people already have experienced it and they navigated it. 2, after that training, you get to have some collaborations and joint productions. Now, these things which they give you, I'll give an example of a story which was done by Solomon Seranja, and that's NBS, and the BBC, about the medicines which were being drugs, which were being stored in the governmental drugs, that investigation, NBS alone, I don't think they would have been able to put it off. But because they joined efforts with the BBC, they were able to do a good job. And that was a global award-winning product that they put out. So those kind of partnerships, by the time Solomon Seranja got to do that, he had received some training, and then he was working with the experts. So as media houses, we need to seek out more of those partnerships and collaborations to produce, train, and put out good products. The other thing is collaboration, even locally in Uganda, ourselves as media houses. I don't see any problem why Nation Media Group, for example, should not, the radio, say for example, KFM, should not partner with a radio station deep in Kasese to do a joint production. We are not competing for the same airspace, but KFM has some positives which they have in Kampala, and a radio station in Kasese has its positives. So if the two come together and they collaborate, they'll put out a quality product at a cheaper cost, as opposed to if that station wanted to do it alone. And then because we have different skill sets, we'll be able to make each other better and put out a good product, a strong product that is good for public interest, good content, and also these partnerships, let's face it, different media houses here are a different level of editorial standards. So not many media houses have the editorial standards. So if you get one person who is at different level and they'll be able to share skills, they'll be able to pull up others and do a better product, which is good for editorial, impart skills and all that. And lastly, let me address myself to the issue of the professional conduct of our journalists. I find this, it's a hard one for me as a journalist, as a fellow journalist, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. And the 2 previous speakers have hinted on it, Daniel and Ruth, on the issue of journalists soliciting money from their sources. That kills us. It kills us. There's the brutality from the government and all, but this kills us harder because we lose our moral credibility to say anything. And whenever we write, somebody will say, those guys, I paid them. I paid them. So we need to train our journalists, first, train them, 2, pay them well, 3, empower them and protect them to make sure they don't easily get compromised. And then we need to make sure we have some institutional memory. I'll give you an example. The last, I'll talk about Nation Media Group. It's a media house I've worked for the longest. and I know a lot that's going on. The last time when the economics and all that could not support the big team we had, we lost a good number in the restructuring. We lost a good number of senior experienced journalists, and right now we have very many young guys, high potential, more talented, and even in terms of the skills and all that, in terms of the technical, the education, because there's a difference between education levels and skills. When you look at the education levels, they're even better educated than the guys who were on the desk, the old guys and all that. But the old guys came with experienced hands. Most of media houses are short on those experienced hands. We need to work out a way of how to make sure we stay with these experienced hands, to make sure they support the young talented guys and see them through and take this to another level. James, the last one, the economic model, the economic model of the media houses. We really need to rethink the economic models. This business of relying on advertising to pay our bills, I don't think it's sustainable anymore. If you look at how we are faring, we need to rethink it. We think how to generate money to keep good journalism going. The current idea of relying on advertising to pay our bills, I don't think it's sustainable. It will not give us independent journalism. It will actually keep sinking us further down. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. And fellow participants, I just want to indulge you for an extra 15 minutes before we come to a close to this. But there are two questions here, or three, that are phrased from the chat, which I'm going to give to all panelists, and then bring in Mr. Chirenga to close this down. And particularly Joe, there's a question coming in from Hussein Musisi. Musisi is saying that the greatest beneficiaries, the real beneficiaries from the media, are the owners and the top management. But still the engagements and dialogue fail to address the small group. By this he means the welfare of field journalists. And you've given us a stance of what you're doing, Joe. I mean, when it comes to the PFI report that we summarized earlier, with all these violations from police, from military, what concrete things is the organization doing in liaison with the government? Concrete, identifiable steps that you have taken to protect your group from the police, from the military brutality, over and above, of course, the other two issues you raise of alliances and networking. But what is that we can point to beyond the football, you know, and dinnering? What are those?
One, beyond the football and the dinner. I don't remember the taste of the food, but I remember the football. One, it's we came out with an MOU. We came out with an MOU which different parties made commitments to each other. One of them, and which I think we are rolling out very soon, was one, we need to understand each other from the different engagements. And you could just see the military has gotten this. They are from a point where they see everyone critical as being opposition. They need to understand that the media, we point out your wrongs, pointing out, telling you that I'm not hearing you well, I'm not against you. I'm saying, please fine tune your audio. So we need to make the military establishments and all that understand the media operations, just like how also the media people, there are so many times we make so many mistakes about the military, reporting about the military. We also need to understand them so that we can write about them better. We've seen many projects, many engagements internationally, the so-called embedment of the embedded journalists. Embedment doesn't mean compromise. So what we are looking at was to have these engagements we had with the UPDF, to have them at every region, going all the way down to make sure every soldier knows how to protect a journalist and the rights of a journalist without dictating what they are supposed to do. And then two, to have the journalists also have the basics of understanding how the military operates and what we expect from each other, to make sure we are able to respect each other. The second bit, which we got from the same engagement where there was a minister of Internal Affairs, was a commitment to push and make sure we have the communications tribunal set up. because they gave a report and they were supposed to give a joint security report to show the absence of communications tribunal and how it affects journalists. So in terms of protecting the journalists, that's what we came up with, that training and make sure the journalists are protected. And then the setup of the communications tribunal, the commitment to push for that to happen. Those are the two things. I don't want to go into
so that means that HRNJ can through you access the military for training, for the police for training. Is that what it means?
Yes, and actually, Human Rights Network for Journalists was with us in all these engagements, and they are part of us. We are working with them.
Okay. The last question to you.
That's available.
Okay. The last question is coming from our colleague, and he wants us to talk about COVID. And he says, this is Prosi. He says, first of all, whether the owners had a package or a plan for their staff during COVID. Some journalists ended up getting COVID. They paid their own treatment, but on top of that, because they were aware and the stigma related to COVID, they were money per story, no story for 3 weeks. Did you guys have any sort of a planned safety measure for the journalists that you employ, who, by the way, are always linking up with people from all sorts? And has COVID taught you anything on the potential of disaster and pandemics and how to protect your people?
I would say just like how many people, and I want to be honest, like the first wave of COVID caught most of us unaware because we did not know the extent of how it would go. Nobody at the beginning of March had no idea that as we turned the month into April, would lose more than 60% of their revenue, just like that. And I'm talking about 60% of revenue. Those were very few media houses which were able to stay afloat. Others lost almost up to 80%. So in terms of a package and all that, that goes down to media house by media house. As NAB, we haven't really talked into the different media houses. We haven't shared in terms of the packages that are going down to the journalists. So I really wouldn't comment on that. But in terms of preparing our journalists, yes, we shared as much as we could, just because we were a conduit anyway for passing on the national communication about the journalism, about SOPs and all that. So in terms of protecting our journalists, it went down to each individual media house and what kind of insurance they have, workman compensation and all that. But otherwise, as an industry, we haven't done anything jointly. So yes, COVID caught us sleeping.
Let me bring in Ruth here, Ruth Sinkindi. I mean, you document every year these violations. HRNJ has documented these violations, but you have proximity to Parliament. A question is coming in here from a colleague. What are you doing as the Commission, or what are you going to do, or what do you recommend, or what do you advise?
Thank you, James. We've made a lot of recommendations, and we have presented a number of reports to Parliament. We've discussed this. I think what we need to do now is follow up. We follow up, but I think the media houses also need to play a critical role, and also the media itself. I note that as media practitioners, you people have a platform. You're a human rights defenders yourself. And because you have a platform, you have that microphone to speak and shout. Unfortunately, many times in our professions, we speak for others and not ourselves. Now, before I went to law school, I think I did, after law school, before I went to LDC, I did a stint at New Vision. So I was working as a freelance. So I know what really happens. And if I can speak for the freelance journalists, because I realized that so many years ago, the situation is still the same. We work with the media. And they are ignored. Many still do not have contracts. So even though Joseph says that they make sure that people have contracts, many media practitioners don't have contracts. But also, if you look at it from a corporate perspective, the people who are out in the field, including the freelance journalists, are your corporate image. If they don't have protective gear, if they are involved in corruption, it reflects on the media house. So it's important that as media houses, we look out for the interests of our staff and the welfare of our staff. We should look out for all journalists, whether freelance or not. We should look out for their interests, their safety, their welfare, so that we ensure that we protect them. Now, back to the Human Rights Commission. Other than Parliament, we have a tribunal where some of the cases of media brutality and violence have been heard, and some have received compensation. Unfortunately, there are those that are pending, because for over 2 years now, we have not had a chairperson to the commission. And even prior that, we had no quorum from our members. So that really has affected our cases. And so we still have a huge backlog. But before even we go to government to do certain things for us as journalists, as human rights defenders, the things that we should be able to do for us, let us speak together. Let us join synergies and fight together, because there are also battles within the media fraternity. You and I know it. We bicker a lot, we fight each other. So instead of bringing our synergies together, we are very busy tearing each other apart. And I think this is the time to reconsider having one voice, so that we have better bargaining power when we go to the state authorities. But yeah, that is what I can say for now. Thanks, James.
Hi, James. Ruth is done.
James, I think, James, you need to unmute yourself.
I think his internet has frozen. Robert, just a bit, if I may just throw a small adjoin on what Ruth has talked about. Yes, Ruth, actually, if you're talking about having done freelance back in the days when you are in between campus and LDC, I don't want to guess how many years ago it was, but I really, I'm speaking as a practitioner, I would say the condition of a freelance journalist has not gotten any better. I don't want to say it's gotten worse. And this is because many media houses, there are very few actually which pay you per story. There are others which tell you, go bring us the story, pay yourself. And this is with all respect to people managing media. That's something that needs to be addressed. We've talked about it.
But Joseph, Joseph, sorry to interrupt. In Uganda, we do not seem to have a clear distinction between staff reporters and freelancers, because even freelancers attached to a media house, they're not paid a retainer fee to keep them to the station. Each of them is treated like a freelancer. At some point, they're treated like staff. So there's a whole mix of how to even clearly distinguish these two. I do not know if you have very clear distinctions, because I was talking to one of
the distinction is this is what happens, and this is the different contracts. We've engaged with the Union of Employers, the Uganda Employers something, I forget the secretary something, and these are the categories that they said from their research exist. Staff reporters, these are people who are employees and they have their benefits and everything. And another category is they are retained. So you pay them a retainer to make sure that they attach the media house, and then they are on top of the retainer, they are paid per piece done. And then another category, you have pure freelancers, call them contractors. They are paid for each piece of work that the media house uses. And those are the three categories that we have at the moment, but not very many media houses clearly follow that criteria. But those are the categories we have. So I was just clarifying that.
Robert, thank you for standing in. There was no transfer of power. It was just a coup by power. Those things don't happen here. Anyways, I just want to use these 9 minutes to bring this to a close. And this is how I want to do it. Daniel, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to tell us in your expertise, where do we go from here? You hinted, of course, on the legislative reform that must happen. You were very quicky about the court, but how do we take these findings and use them to amplify in the quest for media freedom? Just 3 minutes for you. And also, Ms. Ruth, you will come in on the same. How do we move from here more concretely? And then I'll conclude with Joseph, in addition to what he gave us before, and then I'll call in Robert to wrap this up. Bob, Dan.
Thank you very much, James. Just to thank HRNJ for inviting me to this conversation. It's a very important conversation. It's a conversation that we must continually, periodically hold. But just to discuss the broader issues. If you looked at the report of the the Uganda Constitutional Review Commission, the famous Odoki Commission, the report at page 169 provides that no, in view of the political and constitutional history that Uganda had, in view of the 1975 laws that were banning media houses, the 1969 laws of the Obote one government that were banning newspapers. This report, the Odoki report, provides that there should be no banning of any media institution, whether a newspaper or the journalists themselves. But we can see that we have had situations where people have been banned from either practicing their profession or we have seen people like Kalundi Serumaga disappear from the airwaves. We've seen a couple of people disappear on orders of the so-called orders from above. I don't know how above those people are, but moving to the actual issue, the crux of the issue, is that we should not have government seriously engaging or regulating the nitty-gritties of how we express ourselves. I know people have not talked about online broadcasters and the struggles between them and UCC, but these are real struggles. We are getting into the digital age. There should be more self-regulation of the media industry, and the Odoki, the constitutional, the Odoki report, Constitutional Review Commission speaks about these issues. There should be less interference from government institutions on how the media operates. Perhaps there is a question that you posed to me. I should take a few 60 seconds to discuss it. The issue of using courts as an area of a struggle for democracy. Many a times when we do public interest cases, I've seen many people, like recently I wrote a notice of intention to sue to FUFA, and somebody told me, but you cannot win. and I was telling this fellow that who has told you that I am filing because I want to win. I am not filing because I want to win. I am filing actually to cause a debate on that issue. I'm not using the court because I know I'm filing a very excellent case. I recently heard of a lawyer in the US who had been filing cases since he was 20, and he died, I think, at about 80. And many of the cases he had never won them, but he had caused a debate in the public, caused a debate about issues that the society needed to reflect on. So some of these cases, we are filing them, and especially some of the media cases, we file them to cause a debate. We are not filing them to win, to actually win in court. We are filing in the court of law. We are filing them to win in the court of public opinion. So in regard to James's question, the earlier question about this court premises being a site of the struggle for democracy in our a colonial entity here called Uganda, I think it's a very important way of highlighting these issues. Some of us do not go to court necessarily because you're going to win. We're going there to cause a debate on the issue, and possibly some of the people who are in charge of the decision making, if they listen to some of these debates, could change their minds without necessarily the court making a court order, because they listen, they are listening to this media, they are listening, they're reading the newspaper. Possibly there could be a change of thought and direction in where the country is going. But lastly, and more importantly, the people, the key stakeholders within the broadcasting industry, and my colleague Joseph has talked about this. There's a lot of there is no speaking with one voice. There must be issues of commonality within the media space. I am NRM, I'm FDC, I'm People Power, but if we come to the issues of protecting this space, which space is important for everybody, whether you're NRM, whether you're opposition, whether you're an independent journalist, whether you're an NRM leaning journalist, whether you're a NUP leaning journalist, there are issues of commonality that are very important that as a country we should put to the fore. I've just mentioned that Prof. Juko says the unindependent media is the oxygen of a sustainable democracy. What is going to happen if we do not nurture this space, if we do not protect it? Be you NRM, be you NUP, be you whoever has been paid, you've been corrupted to mess us up. What will happen if this space is not protected by all of us? The country will slip into anarchy. And no NRM person wants a country.
That is too heavy for cash.
Yes, no NRM person wants political instability. No NUP person wants political instability. No independent journalist wants political instability. All of us will get messed up. So it's very important that we protect this platform over which people can voice their concerns. I know there are challenges with that, the so-called safety valve theory, that they, like the way China practices it, that the government will allow you enough space for you to release your busungu, to release your emotions, but they will not allow you enough space for you to enable the change that you want to affect you. We need to protect this space, whatever political, economic, social views that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joe, you have a minute. Joseph, way forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Beyond the dinner and the football.
No, my kids are playing football. Beyond all that, one of the things and Daniel has just touched on it as he was winding up, this is to the journalists. We've seen many different organizations of journalists, and some people will say multiplicity is good, but I think for this purpose, we need one strong body bringing together journalists, where, and if they come together, they're able to speak with one voice and demand one common good. And this voice will also enable them. And at NAB, one of the things we've been talking about with the Editors Guild is we need to push to be united, to be credible as an organization, I mean, as journalists, to be able to push for self-regulation. If you're able to do self-regulation, and we all know the difference between self-regulation and self-censorship, the moment we are able to do self-regulation, I'll tell you, most of this so-called heavy hand from the government and all that, we will be able to push them back and create more room to promote independent media, promote media freedom. So self-regulation is one of the key things we need to work on, but it won't happen right now from my understanding and analysis of the different organizations that bring together journalists. It would be a big hurdle to push if we don't have that unity. And that same unity would be able to push things like Media Council, to push them and put them in line so that we're able to have a working institution that represents the government, that supports the media, stuff like that. That can only happen if the journalists are united under one organization. Thank you very much. And thank you once again. Thank you very much for this invite, for the platform, for the ideas, for everything I've learned. After this, I feel like I've been in a class doing a law course. Yeah, thank you, Professor. Thank you, Ruth, for sharing your wisdoms.
Thank you. Ruth, some 2 minutes. In the meantime, Professor JB, you prepare yourself for some 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nkobi. I just, for me, I think I've already given my recommendations, but I just want to re-emphasize that as a commission, we are still calling government to respect and protect media freedoms. And for the journalists, we call upon, especially the media practitioners, to uphold professionalism and responsible reporting. I think that is very important for the respect of this noble profession. And I also want to re-emphasize what I previously said, and I think Daniel said it and Joseph, that there is need for unity. Journalists should join synergies and have one voice. You have a platform within which you can promote the issues pertaining the media. However, where you're disjointed, where you bicker, I think you cannot achieve that. And recently we just watched you guys voting your leadership, and I was appalled at the sentiments, the bickering, the disjointedness out there in the same media, your media platforms. It was really uncalled for. As lawyers, there are things that we protect. If it's about courts, it's about a profession. It doesn't matter whether you're NRM or NUP or whatever, you speak with one voice. If it is the medical profession, they protect their profession jealously. And I'm requesting and praying that the media also considers this. If you are a journalist or in the media profession, try to guard your profession jealously, because that is really the source of your income. It's what makes you. You're defined by that. So where you have fake journalists, where you have issues of corruption, where you have fake news, misinformation, then you are really doing a disservice to your profession. Finally, I am calling on the owners of media houses to respect the journalists they use. Let us ensure that they all have contracts, and even for the freelance, they are the image that is out there. Let us also look out for their interests and protect them for the good of our media houses. I thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. JB, do you have you have some 2 minutes? You want to come in now? Prof?
Yes, thank you very much,
okay.
James.
I want to bring this to a close. Okay.
Yeah. Can I go on, James?
Yes, JP, you have some 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Daniel, Ruth, Joseph, Robert. Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? James?
Yes, we hear you, JB.
I don't know if I can hear you.
JB, I hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I was thanking the panelists. Very good points, and some of them, what I wanted to raise, they have raised. But I think one of the important things I think which we need to mention is I agree with Ruth. I agree with Dan. We want to take this conversation beyond the courts, and we need to create spaces and tap into networks. Joseph mentioned some of these things. Can we make use of the regional networks we have? Can we make use of the regional organizations, the regional structures? What we can't say here, can we get colleagues in Kenya or Tanzania to say it? You remember in Tanzania when President Magufuli could not talk about COVID. And there are many ways where journalists in Uganda spoke on behalf of the Tanzanians. So can we make use of the regional body, the East African Law Society, the regional media organizations, the regional courts, maybe to raise our voices? It's very important to take. Can we adopt what I would call the "Be My Brother's Keeper" doctrine, my brother's keeper doctrine, so that if the Kenyans can't do it, can we do it for them? If we can't say it, can people there say it for us? And then there was a mention of the quality of the product, which is a very good thing. I think so. I can't remember who mentioned it. I think Ruth. Yes, that's a big challenge. You can very often see there's a drop in the quality of products, fake news, things like that. I think we need to address the political economy of the media in Uganda. Not just talking about licenses, but what are all those things that impact on the way the media works? So we look at the problem of licensing. Who is given a license? What are the conditions for a license? Can they pay? But also, should we just give everybody a license, or should we have categories? The people don't deal with the news, like the churches, like my friends who just play music. Those can do their thing, but they are not journalists, and they shouldn't be bothered about those people. Can we think positively about a new way of licensing radio? That's very good, but also the training of the journalists. We had a training recently with the National Coalition, but I'm telling you, there are many journalists who don't understand even where their rights originate. Mr. Sempalo, you agree with that? We've been in these struggles together with James. You find people can't understand where even in the Constitution their rights come from, the laws that defend them, the laws that are against them. So we need to do quite a lot of education in this thing. And I wanted also to ask, can we think of a new type of media beyond the print and beyond the radio, using new technologies to find new media platforms, not these online website-based things, but a new media where journalists can be well paid to express very good opinions, where you don't need all that investment of buying printing presses or a platform where we can express these things with good journalism, and someone who can pay people for doing good journalism. Because as Joseph mentioned, there are so many good journalists out there. Now they've left the newsroom. We're experiencing a juniorization of the newsroom. But how do we tap into those other people who have gone elsewhere and they are good? Which platform, which product can we put together, and who can pay them for the good journalism? But otherwise, but finally, I think what I wanted to say is that there's a challenge of an agenda of the various media organizations. We seem to have very many agendas. Ruth mentioned some of the things. Can we have an agenda that, one, let's focus on the licensing, two, let's do this and this, but there are so many initiatives which come in place. And I think, Mr. Nkubi, allow me to say this as the last one. I think we need to impress it on government. I think we need a fully-fledged ministry. All this confusion is coming because we no longer have a ministry. We have a minister, but effectively without a ministry, mainly involved in IT and what. But when we had a Ministry of Information, there were directors of training, directors of this, director of this, but now we just have a minister. And so we are here battling with UCC, battling with the military, battling with the what. I don't know how we are going to impress it upon the president that we need to have a fully-fledged ministry. But this business of media council, media center, we are trying, and I really appreciate the efforts colleagues are making. But I think at some point, I think the president needs to sit down and say, I think let's have this ministry. I'll stop there. I write the rest of the comments in the interest of time, but I thank you very much for giving me these 2 minutes. James?
Okay. Thank you very much, JB. I'm going to call in Robert to close this, but there are 5 or 6 takeaways from here. One, which came in from the discourse of Mr. Waliemera, that there is need for, I think, HRNJ and colleagues to compile all pending cases before the Constitutional Court for potential advocacy with the Chief Justice, such that they can be either cause listed or to show expression on why they keep delaying. I think that was very strong. Over 12 or so cases affect journalism and rights, but they are pending, and there is no commensurate. Understand I'm breaking. Robert, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, James.
Great. Yeah, such that we can have that. Secondly, for purposes of common agenda and commonality and unity, there is need for a national platform that brings together all organizations doing work of media, not media houses, but organizations bring together journalists from the region, at least the leaderships, to create this commonality. The Sobujas, the Gulu, Media Club, and so forth. Apparently, from what is emerging that I picked from the charts, there is no single platform currently in Uganda that brings these organizations together for common agenda before they all disperse back to their region. Number three, there is also need to rejuvenate some organizations that at regional level that have since died down because of poor leadership or lack of focus. This would help the regional problems to remain regional that can be dealt with there. Then thirdly or fourthly, the need to arrange interfaces between journalists and this association of media owners. And here the comment was between journalists, not journalists representatives, but between journalists and the media owners to have a discussion on this. And then they need to push for legislative reform. And someone was saying, can we consider the potentiality of the private members in this new parliament to see whether the problems that have been highlighted by Dr. Dan on laws are dealt with. And someone was saying we need a plan of legislative reform that is well focused, targeting on particular issues, including laid down time periods. Then another person is saying we need to consider more brilliantly and strategically private prosecutions. If need be, this should be a storm. Take on so many police officers such that we can storm them up. I'm the one who has added the word storm, but the point is private prosecution, such that they can feel or can move away from the shield of government protecting them. The discourse on training and reaching out to the military and police and the judiciary to ally them with the media demands and rights has also come up, but even then it should not be abrupt and ad hoc, but it should be governed by MOU such that it is periodical and such that these institutions recognize the presence, the essence of the media. The other one is HRNJ and other partners should consider taking such information of the press index beyond the domestic realm and consider spaces like the African Commission, the UN Human Rights Committee, mechanisms like UPR, among others. Someone was saying this information is too great to just live here in Uganda. And then that the Uganda Human Rights Commission or the journalists should push and write stories about the Uganda Human Rights Commission missing a chair, which negatively impacts on the justice sought by journalists in the tribunal. So someone was drawing an intersectionality between journalist rights and the commission being stable and having the tribunals functioning. And lastly, journalists or HRNJ and alike organizations should opportunistically take advantage of the ongoing reforms. For example, the UCC tribunal, which is being discussed for establishment, and provide their views on how such a tribunal should run. I've written so many others, but we shall always classify them into thematic topics. For myself, I want to bring in Bob to close this. Thank you for the panelists, for all of you who have stood with us, remained with us. We began with 87. We have only lost 6 because of connection. For myself, I give it now to the Executive Director of the Coalition to close this chapter.
Thank you very much, Mr. James Nkubi.
Mr. Chirenga.
Can you listen? Can you hear me? James, can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir.
Thank
Yes,
you.
we can hear you loud, Mr.
Thank you.
Robert Chilenga.
Permit me to add my voice and thank the leadership of the Human Rights Network for Journalists for this webinar and, of course, compiling the index on freedom of expression. As the panelists have indicated, freedom of media and expression is a key ingredient in the exercise and enjoyment of other rights in any democratic society. We should also note that human rights are not given on a silver platter. It's always a struggle, and this has been so historically. This struggle has its challenges, threats, and risks to which the coalition, the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, has attempted to ensure human rights defenders, such as journalists, when they are under threat or attack. Human rights defenders beyond journalists face many challenges, and these range from physical assaults, arrests, illegal detentions, threats of closure of their organizations, name calling, and of course the destructions of their tools of trade, including others. Permit me to reiterate what some of our panelists have said in terms of moving forward, that we need to have a common voice and be united and work as a collective. And this is not only a challenge with journalists, but it's even a bigger challenge within the civil society sector. And no matter how much we organize ourselves, if we continue operating in silos, I don't think we are going to achieve much. I think there is a lesson we should be able to all learn from border borders. If you've observed border borders and at whatever stage they operate, when a border has a challenge of getting change from when a client has paid him or her, a border will just put up his hand holding the note, and any other border on the road will stop to assist him. A border under attack or threat on any road will be defended by all other borders, and they can take even matters beyond that. So it's important to learn how do these borders collectively act together to protect their interests. I would also like to reiterate the point by Professor J.B. Waswa in terms of amplifying the voices on issues affecting journalists, that we can use the other regional countries, but I think we can also use the existing human rights mechanisms at the African Union, and of course the international systems, the charter-based systems and the treaty-based systems. I know our country does not like to have its name mentioned in those international forums in terms of the respect and promotion of human rights. So whenever there is a negative reporting, you will see them act as opposed to when they're here. So it's important that we make use of these mechanisms to amplify the voices of journalists who are under threat or attack, which constitutes, of course, the civic space, the entire civic space. I would like now to express appreciation to the panelists, Mr. Daniel Waliemera, a scholar, Mr. Joe Beyanga from the Association of Broadcasters, my sister Ruth Sechindi from the National Human Rights Institution, of course, the moderator, Mr. James Kubi, and Professor J.B. Waswa, and to all the participants. Last but not least, I would like also to express our appreciation to Freedom House, who have been providing support to the cluster on civic space under the Rights and Access to Justice activity. And we look forward to continuous engagement with all these human rights defenders. With these few remarks, I want to declare this meeting closed and to thank all the participants and to wish you a good week in the course of your work. Thank you very much. James, are you there? I've declared the meeting
Thank
closed.
you, guys. You can leave at will. Yes,
Robert
you
sounds very
it,
distinguished.
There's no other debate format.
No,
You're not
my
serving
namesake will
tea.
never disappoint.
You're not serving us tea.
Maybe someone should
agree.
make some
We need some
administrative
ET.
announcements.
We are trying to, as much as possible, avoid any physical contact on anything, including cups, plates.
Robert, there are disposable cups and plates.
There's a
Thank
sanitizer
you.
here.
Then that way we let's divide.
My namesake can
means
make an
that,
administrative announcement.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, guys. It was a pleasure having each of you. But also we've picked a lot of information from the chat room. So we'll be following up on each of these contributions.
Thank you and have a great week.
Thank you. You too. Robert, could you stay on? Sempala.
Much obliged.
Robert, thank you. I'm peeling off. I'll leave you in James's able hands, since he has dismissed us with costs.
Thank you, Don
James, I hope you're fine.
I am fine, thank you.
Okay. Robert, very insightful meeting, and I've learned a lot as well. I didn't know we can get protective gear from the army, so we shall go and apply for some.
If they don't give us those ones that will get
in your personal capacity.
But thank you so much.
Potential charging before the military. Emma, can you put the pillow people? Emma, can you hear me? Emma, are you there?
Emma's around. Maybe he just needs to put on his mic. He's around.
No, I thought that he was around and he gets off some of these people because they will not go off. Some people switch on their computers and they go to the pitch.
Oh, okay. Let me.
Anyway, we're okay here. We're okay. Now, Robert, I was saying, I hope you can hear me. I don't know whether I wrote around 16 issues, and honestly speaking, some of them were new to me or extremely progressive.
Yes, I'm here, boss. I'm listening for the 16 issues and everything else.
Yeah, I was saying that, let me first ask, is there a freelancers association in Uganda? An umbrella that brings together all freelancers?
Yes and no. Because it was formed by some journalists. Bokenya Church Ambrose formed one, Gideon Tugume formed one. There's another group that formed, but I think they crumbled before they even began. You know, it's extremely very difficult to have freelancers all congregate under one umbrella, because some journalists don't even know if they're staff or freelancers. Like those that work with NTV, or okay, let me say Vision Group. You're not allowed to work with any other media house. You are assigned as and when the editor deems it fit. You don't choose when to work and not when to work. So those ones feel they're freelancers, but New Vision feels they're their staff, even when they are not don't qualify as staff for the New Vision. If somebody has to write for any other media house or share a piece, they have to change their byline, their names, because it is punishable in a particular media house for a freelancer to deal with the highest bidder. Yet the modus operandi should be that I should supply to the highest bidder for my piece, for my work, and be paid accordingly. So some journalists don't want to say we are freelancers, so we want to affiliate. So it's very difficult, if anything. And also, some work with media houses and hide their identities. There are many that work for Radio 1, based in Kasesa, and they're working for Radio Simba in Uganda. They only use different names. In Entebbe, there I know of about 3 who work for different media houses, but they hide their names. So you can think you have about mitwale ebiri of freelancers, yet you have fewer. So there is not any functional freelancer organization or association that I am aware of.
One of the participants wrote to me privately, and they were saying HRNJ has not considered, I am quoting, HRNJ, despite the too much training that is welcome, has not considered the plight of freelancers in their own specific capacity. Is it possible to liaise with Robert and inquire into the working modalities of freelancers, who they are, their peculiar demands, their peculiar plight that they face, and potentially come out with a study with a view of strengthening their voice as a cluster within the wider media fraternity?
Oh, okay.
That is food for thought for you.
Yeah, it is food for thought, but literally, sorry, my microphone had gone off. But it's extremely difficult to factor in freelancers and their peculiar needs and everything, because literally it's what every journalist needs. We have some piece we worked on some time back about needs of freelancers. We sampled, but maybe we need to do a current one. They are not so much different from the staff reporters, because you'd think that the staff reporters can have legal representation, but that's not the case when they're trapped. They're equally running around like the freelancers. You can think that they have, the only difference is they have a particular pay coming their way at the end of the month, and some have insurances, but majority don't even have medical insurances, even when they are staff. But it's a very big point to begin on, to venture so much into that area,